Hello, what have we here? How you doing, yo, pirate? So good to see you, Chewie. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was a tiny little soy pod. And that soy pod was the only soy pod in the whole galaxy. And because of the multiverse, it was a whole universe of soy pods. And those soy pods were strong with the soy force. Run, Luke, run. Run, Luke, run. Run to your soy. Use the force, Luke. Use the soy, Luke. I was going to come on here and I was going to just talk about soy and bitch, but I'm not going to. That would be too easy. Everybody and their grandpappy has done a video on why they hate the new Star Wars. So I'm not going to do that. We all know it's soyish. So we're going to talk about the philosophical elements in it. And I might bitch a little bit. And I had to throw in my dumb voices there because come on. You can't talk about Star Wars without doing all the dumb voices. Can you know? I still believe. I noticed all kinds of things this time around. I noticed Theosophy. If you don't know what Theosophy is, it's the cult of Madame Blavatsky, the secret doctrine ISIS unveiled. She was probably a British spy, but her esoteric philosophy spawned a whole bunch of spin-offs, things like Anthroposophy with Rudolf Steiner. And Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy is a weird mix of a bunch of different traditions. It actually influenced the National Socialista. I have to say everything in code. I can't say normal terms anymore because of algorithms. But I started realizing this last time in the new ones. And yeah, I finally broke down and saw these new ones. I thought I've got to comment on them since everyone else be talking about them. It's time for me to be talking about them. There's some obvious ones and some not so obvious ones. So first of all, Star Wars is theosophical in the sense of antimatter. It's Gnostic. It has the old idea of dualism. And so we all know about Joseph Campbell and that George Lucas utilized the archetypal ideas of Joseph Campbell, which are just watered down Carl Jung, basically. So if you've read Joseph Campbell, you know about the many masks of the heroes and the many masks of God and these kinds of things. This is all, again, watered down Carl Jung. And the idea is that there's patterns in different cultures and comparative religious traditions. And that so if you look at all these patterns, you can find archetypal patterns. The old sage, right? Ben Kenobi, right? You remember Ben Kenobi? Come here, little one. Don't be afraid. Run, Luke, run. I grew up with Star Wars, so obviously growing up before it became soy, I was a big fan of Star Wars. And then it got took over by some of these crazy people that run these big corporations, and it turned crazy. But you'll notice when Jedi die, for example, they vaporize, they evaporate. This is the Gnostic idea of crude flesh, right? Crude flesh has to be transcended. That goes back to Plato. It goes back to Far Eastern philosophy before Plato. The crude flesh has to be escaped from, because as Plato said, soma sema, the body is a tomb. The body is your prison. So in that regard, it's just kind of a copy-paste job of Far Eastern philosophy. And then it borrows a lot of elements of other religious traditions like Christianity, right? You have the virgin birth of Anakin. It's just you right? Whining Anakin. I didn't realize how much Anakin, and by the way, he passes that whining down to Luke, if you haven't noticed. Ever notice how much Luke whines? But I was going to the Tachi station to pick up some power converters. Huh? You can waste time with your Uncle Owen, who's obviously a drunk. You waste time with your friends with your chores. I want you up on that ridge. Okay. Uncle Owen, this R2 unit has a bad motivator. Hey, what are you trying to push on us? Right. But you'll notice that these elements of other religions like the virgin birth come into. I just went on a crazy jag there. But other things I noticed, other symbolism, right? Like hand of glory type stuff. Remember when Luke loses his hand? Anakin loses his hand. And then Anakin cuts off Christopher Lee, Count Dooku, both of his hands, right? And then he assassinates him when the Emperor tells him to.
Lord Vader, rise! Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
It's pretty good. I guess that's a pretty good Emperor there. Oh, I'm afraid it will be quite operational when your friends arrive. Again, I hadn't seen this in many, many years, so it was fun to go back to it and to do all these voices. But virgin birth is borrowed. We have the Moses mythology being borrowed of freeing the slaves. Because Anakin is... But by the way, if you're a Jedi, why didn't you go back and save your mom? Is your mom's in slavery? Under that... Annie, right? Your mom's enslaved to this fat Italian alien, and you, like, why didn't you, as a Jedi, go back and free her? It took you 10 years of running around with Ewan McGregor. I mean, if you're a Jedi, why can't you go free the slaves? I don't know. I never got that. And then the midichlorians, this is a kind of throwing homage to bloodlines, the power of bloodlines. That came to the forefront, right? Because Luke is very concerned with his bloodline, who his father is. And the Force is strong in certain bloodlines, right? And we know that the elite have that view. They certainly think that certain bloodlines are more powerful than others. Blue bloods, right? There's almost like there's magic power in bloodlines, and some of them actually believe that. Some of the elite do. So the Jedi, they're kind of the warrior monk class who have the ability to levitate things. They meditate, Eastern meditation, and as we saw with Luke, they can astrally project. If you didn't notice, that was Luke's astral projection. So in that final battle at what is it, part 2 of the new ones, if you noticed, a lot of themes were ahead of the time, right? Transhumanism, because Darth Vader is a warning, I think, against transhumanism. I mean, he's more machine than man, as Obi-Wan Kenobi says, and I think that it's also a warning against a technocratic empire. It harkens obviously back to the old Roman Empire, the old Republic, passing the Rubicon into the phase of rulership by Caesar. That's all pretty obvious, but I noticed a lot of that being put into the first 3, which if you haven't seen the first 3 in a long time, the only thing really relevant in there is the Tard Binks. No, I'm joking. He's like the worst thing imaginable. I can't believe that existed. By the way, he does seem to have a racial component to him. I'll let you decide what you think about that. But I did notice that going back and watching it this time. I was like, you know what? It is a racial thing. But what was interesting about the first 3 was the fake flag that's used to move the Republic into an empire. And the Emperor is running controlled opposition. I was kind of blowing my mind. It's like Star Wars can show you controlled opposition, but boomers still can't figure out that what controlled opposition is, and stage intelligence operations in the real world, this kind of stuff. But Palpatine, of course, stages this stuff so that he can become the Chancellor, if you don't recall. To become the Emperor when he's the Chancellor. So he kind of displaces the Senate and makes himself, almost all powerful. And then we notice that the temptation of the Empire is not just the force of this battle station, right? Don't try to frighten us with your sorcerous ways, Lord Vader. The battle station is not just a technocratic star-killing weapon, planet-killing weapon. They also are interested in cloning, which is a goal of the technocrats. So I started noticing all these predictions of technocracy and warnings of technocracy. And so I wanted to almost root for the rebellion, early on. When you're watching the early ones, you want to root, the 4, 5, and 6, you want to root for the rebellion. But then when you get to Anakin facing off against Obi-Wan, it's like Obi-Wan's like, only a Sith deals in absolutes. And you're like, wait a minute. So the Empire is correct because it doesn't believe in relativism? It's like, come on, this is so stupid, right? And a lot of people bitched at the time about Hayden's Hayden's pretty funny. I mean, I don't think he's actually a bad actor. If you watch something like Shattered Glass, he's really good in that. But some of the lines in this are pretty comedic. It's like being around you is intoxicating. He delivers them so. Obi-Wan, he doesn't trust me, and it's very nasally, and he's very whiny, and he doesn't listen, and sand is coarse, and I hate it, and it gets in everything. So, the acting is atrocious. Natalie Portman she's also not that great in this. But by the way, too, did you notice that Leia in the first one talks with a British accent, and then Leia by Empire and Return of the Jedi loses her British accent? I don't know. There's weird stuff going on in Star Wars. But it's obviously pantheism with the midichlorians. It's obviously esoteric elite bloodline stuff going on. All that conspiracy element that you think might be there is there. And I didn't really catch any of this until now. Also, could the midichlorians be a reference to Leibniz's monads? I mean, I was trying to figure out why did they come up with this? And I guess that's the closest thing I could think of from philosophy. And of course, Leibniz is getting that from, probably whatever esoteric stuff he was reading with his monads. And the closest thing I could think of is Leibniz's monads. So that's probably what that is. But if you have a better theory on midichlorians, let me know. But as we saw, the Emperor, Count Dooku, they are staging the fake flags, and they are working with the banking houses and the Trade Federation. So he controls the economy, he controls economics, and he controls usury and banking. And I was like, good grief, this is just about reality, isn't it? This is about the real world. And he's even using fake flags, and he's secretly cloning. It's the military-industrial complex. Again, and you want to root for the rebellion, but then you realize that they are like the fake. Even the rebellion is fake, because the rebellion is run by pink-haired Laura Dern. I mean, come on. And they believe in absolute relativism, which is total nonsense, right? This is why it was so infuriating. But if you go back and watch it, you'll notice that it's kind of an Illuminist thing. Palpatine is kind of like the head of the Illuminati, you could say. And he clones himself, I think. Isn't that what the last new one was about? This new one with Rey? He clones himself. By the way, he does Order 66. Did you catch that? 66 is the great work in some of the systems of the Kabbalah and the Qliphoth, right? The great work of Kabbalistic alchemy. And the reason I know I'm right about this is because I'm watching all this and I'm thinking, all right, there's obviously some Kabbalistic elements here. And then I went, wait a minute, Yod is important in Kabbalah, right? The Hebrew Yod, that's Kabbalistic. And then I realized that it's pantheism, that's Kabbalistic. And then I realized that it's not just Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, it's also Theosophy, which is based partly in Kabbalah. If you read The Secret Doctrine of Blavatsky, she references Kabbalism like 5 or 6 times. And it's not just Luke facing off with his shade self in the cave, in the underworld, with his, in this Jungian sense, it's also Kabbalism. And how did I finally come to that conclusion? How did it all crystallize? Well, if you remember, when the Emperor at the end of this new one is talking to Rey and to Kylo Ren or whatever, he's talking about the dyad and the monad and the dyad, and he's like, you will be a Rey in the dyad, and then together you will become one, right? When you strike me down, and there will be an empire. And it was a giant inverted black pyramid without a cap. Isn't that crazy? So the pyramid is this giant inverted black capless thing where the emperor is at, right? And you go in through the bottom, and so that's the cap of the pyramid. The inverted pyramid is the emperor's, lair or whatever, and he looks like Frankenstein, floating around on that thing. But the key part was when he points out the ray of the dyad, which is the rays of light in Platonism or Kabbalism, or in these other systems, Theosophy and so forth. Blavatsky and her crew, Alice Bailey, they talk about the 7 rays or the 7 energies and light and so forth. And then it hit me. Yes, that's what they're talking about. And what's her name? Ray. She's the ray. She's the divine ray, and thus she is the feminine principle who balances the force. So earlier, the force had been too masculine, you see. And you had Vader and Luke and Anakin, fighting, blah, 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 and the Emperor. And now Rey comes along, and she's the one that brings balance because she's the feminine principle. But she also has within her masculinity, right? So I just realized that the whole thing is quite literally Kabbalistic Theosophy. And I knew, it's Eastern philosophy, it's Gnosticism, it's Carl Jung, but it didn't crystallize until these new ones where they specifically mention the ray of the dyad, the dyad, right? And this goes back to Pythagoras, this goes back to Plato, the original one that gives birth to the dyad, which gives birth to the triad, you see. And that is Platonism, that is Hermetic philosophy, that is all of the perennial traditions, the Hermetic traditions, the Gnostic traditions, ultimately kind of come out of that original skeletal system, you could say, of philosophy. So that's what Star Wars is about. Star Wars is about dual principles of rebellion and revolution, dialectics back and forth, right? Male and female, one and many, monad, dyad, and then the dyad itself, back and forth, and the revolution and the empire, and the revolution and the empire, back and forth and back and forth. And these are the 2 pillars of mercy and severity of the Kabbalah. And so balance is what you find in the middle. That's what Star Wars is about. Star Wars is Kabbalistic Theosophy. Now, I'm not advocating Kabbalistic Theosophy. I critique it all. I critique these views all the time. We have multiple talks critiquing Gnosticism and these kinds of esoteric worldviews. But that's what Star Wars is about. And I've not really heard anybody else notice that. I'm sure somebody has noticed. I'm not saying nobody. I haven't watched everybody's Star Wars analysis. But that's what it's about. And aside from that esoteric element, I do want to mention the point about fantasy. I just did a great interview with Kantbot and Tech Wars. Go listen to the Tech Wars podcast with me and Kantbot talking about fantasy and MK Ultra and how the elite utilize fantasy to control us. And that's actually a big part of how we are controlled, how we are corralled. And so I do want to stress that, there's sports to control a big part of society, whether it's football or UFC. There's video games to control another part of society. And there's fantasy and science fiction to be a synthetic masculinity for another section of society. And so the mere fact that guys will make infinite numbers of videos about their anger over the Star Wars mythology being altered itself is sad and pathetic. You need to know real books. You need to know real philosophy. And there are tiny inklings of real philosophy, you might could say, in Star Wars. It's a bunch of comparative religion jibber jabber mixed together. But maybe it could point you in the right direction of higher principles, right? Maybe. And at least if you had a philosophic knowledge, philosophic understanding, you might become a man, right? Not a Jedi, but a man. So instead of seeking out these fantasy realms that are not real, try to find and penetrate reality itself. Behind reality is actually the living God, not an impersonal force, but a personal God, the living God. That living God is Logos, but that Logos is the second person of the Godhead, Jesus Christ. And that's not an impersonal Greek principle or force. It's a personal God. So that's what Star Wars is missing, is that it's a space opera. It's an archetypal drama, but it doesn't have the right worldview. It doesn't have the right philosophy and the right grounding, and thus it's always stuck in dialectics. And not only is the philosophy of Star Wars dialectical and stuck in dialectics, it's also part of a dialectical system to manage you and to give you a replacement mythology for a real story in a real meaning, in a real worldview that you could only find in something like Scripture. This is Jay Dyer for Jay's Analysis. If you like this analysis, give me a like below. Tell me what your thoughts are. Tell me if you think I missed something. I'm sure there's a lot of elements of Star Wars that you could come up with that I didn't get into, but these are the main points I wanted to hit. And if you would, share this video and let me know again what you think, and we'll talk to you soon. Also, if you like this, you can buy my book, Esoteric Hollywood. Go to Jay's Analysis, and you'll see the shop, and I have lengthy philosophic film analyses, very popular books, Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2. And if you buy them from my website, they are all signed copies. You can also subscribe to Jay's Analysis there and get access to the full talks and lectures. Have a good day. If you like this analysis, be sure to click subscribe and give me a thumbs up down below. Also, be sure to check out Jay's Analysis and definitely click the bell down below to be sure you get the updates.